I remember Christmas Day 2016. We had 2 million in liabilities. We didn't have enough money in the bank account to make the next payroll for the team, and we had 60 staff. And we got a check for $8 million in the bank. So it's like you hear entrepreneurs talk about this stuff. Elon talks about it with SpaceX and Tesla. Branson talks about it with his businesses. That ability to persist and carry through when things are toughest really separates the most successful people in the world from those that said, yeah, I tried, but this thing happened and it didn't work.
Brett, thank you so much for joining us. It's really wonderful to have you on our Live Long and Prosper. I've been such a fan of your work and your vision for many years. It's an absolute treat for me personally to have you.
I appreciate it, Caesar. Yeah, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you. I think, Brett, let's jump right into the details of a lot of the vision you've been articulating for nearly a couple of decades right now about how...
You're making me sound old, brother. No, but it's true. 15 years at least.
15 years. And, you've been talking about the future of banking, about digitization and AI in a very profound way. So I'd love for you to maybe just draw on a little bit of that arc of your thesis, your history, as you've articulated in your book, many best-selling books.
Yeah, I'm just about to release number 7. And Bank 4, which was my last banking book, which came out in 2019, was on the bestsellers list on Amazon at least for 5 years. So really solid work, I guess. But yeah, let me sort of go back. So it sort of really starts with the whole .com movement. There was attempts during that time to sort of digitize banking, but they sort of failed. And so there was this feeling within I worked in internet banking design. I worked on global bank brands in terms of their .com strategy. I literally built pieces of infrastructure of some of the biggest banks. I worked on front-end development. I worked on some of the first retail provision products online, the first digital travel agency thing, a bunch of stuff. And of course, then in 2010, I ended up founding Movein, which was the first digital bank in the world. The first app where you could apply for a debit card for a bank, or for a bank account. But what sort of happened is as the .com started to happen, and it sort of really didn't change banking the way retail did, then a lot of bankers were like, see, we're good. The internet didn't change our business. We're good, And so that created even more resistance to digital transformation within banking it's like, oh, come on, we're going to have this argument again. We already did that with the internet and we won. That was sort of like how our bankers thought about it. So it was my job to dispel them of that opinion, as a technologist, really talking about how the technology would change and impact banking. So the first book I wrote was called Bank 2.0, and that was published in April 2010. And that went on to create, obviously, the career I have now as a banking futurist in that space, and gave me the space to create the startup and so forth. But that was actually based on an earlier report I did for HSBC in 2006. So the big predictions of 2015, that mobile banking was going to overtake internet banking, which was going to overtake branch banking, even back then in 2005, 2006, when we presented this to the board of HSBC in Canary Wharf, they're like, you're on drugs. This is crazy talk. This is never going to happen, And so that was something I felt passionate about bringing to the world. And basically I figured out that, while I had a thesis about digitization, and while lots of people sort of agreed, the reality was you had this cabal at the top, this leadership in the banking sector who weren't ready to hear it. So I felt it was my job to make bankers at the CEO level aware of that. And that's sort of what happened. So I built on that practically. I started a podcast called Breaking Banks in 2013, around the time Breaking Bad was popular. Been running that for a decade. So, really I found myself both forecasting, not predicting, that's not the right word, forecasting what was going to happen in the banking industry and being intimately involved in that change, which is quite cool actually, because, it sort of happened, not all the way that I thought it would, but in many ways to see these things unfold and go, yep, that's what I called it, It's pretty cool.
I can imagine. So Brett, how much of your vision do you think has come true already? And, if you can expand a bit on that, at a global level, because one of your perspectives is so interesting as you cover pretty much the entire world.
Well, so I'll tell you one that failed and one that was people thought it would. So remember, 2009, I wrote the first book, and it was published 2010. And in that book, I predicted in 2016 that mobile wallets would overtake plastic cards. And I also predicted that in 2018, countries like the US and the UK and so forth would start to wind down the check business. Right now, remember I'm predicting almost or forecasting 10 years ahead in this case. For the plastic card things, it was pretty close. It happened in 2017 because of the growth of the Chinese mobile wallets, Alipay and Tencent WeChat Pay, where just the volume in China alone on those two wallet programs was enough to exceed the global card transaction volume. And of course, now it's almost double. And, that's not including M-Pesa and, Pix in Brazil now and UPI and all of those
Yeah,
things.
in India, like we've seen itself, just Google Pay itself has a couple of 100 million users, 1.5 trillion going every year. Like just scale is crazy.
Yeah, and it's going to be like if you start now talking about AI based payments, which I'm sure we're going to get to. But if you the rails that will enable that are these real time rails like Pix and UPI, and if you're going to have autonomous payments driven by agents, you have to have it real time. Right? It has to be. So we're starting to see that early infrastructure of AI based banking sort of emerge now.
That's super cool. Do you see it going up or down the stack in the overall banking space? Like there's payments, there's savings, there's investments. Like how deep and where do you see those parts coming along at the same pace or sort of lagging behind?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends on the time frame, but if we're talking 20 to 30 years out, then there's even a question as whether the asset class environment that we have is sustainable, right? Whether capitalism in its current form is sustainable. And if you have high levels of automation, it leads to something like universal basic income, then that dramatically changes the way you think about money in the system. And over time, that's going to, again, so like at some point in time, if the government's paying you money so you can consume, it may be actually just more efficient to provide you with those basic services without having to pay you income so you could consume, right? And so then becoming a sort of a universal basic service economy or basic asset economy, that's certainly a possibility. So it depends on the time frame. But in the shorter term, we're moving from what you would call banking products to embedded banking experiences. One of the early examples is buy now, pay later, which has had phenomenal success particularly in Europe. Klarna's application of AI right now is probably one of the best in the industry. So you've got buy now, pay later, which is a better credit experience built into the moment of the purchase. And then you've got better examples of savings as well. You've got fractional savings, fractional investment platforms like Robinhood as an example, but you've got things like Yuibao, which sat on the Alipay mobile wallet in China, which was the largest deposit pool we've ever created. And that was just mobile deposits. And it was just using behavioral psychology to get people to save. Phenomenally successful. So these are not savings products in the way we would think of them. And so when you start thinking about investments and so forth in the future, the more likely outcome is that we will have an AI that will manage our investments. And we won't actually know at any time what our portfolio contains because it will be highly optimized based on a mission statement or something like that we've trained this AI on. And that's also going to include a lot of digital assets. So that's going to, I'm not talking NFTs, but I'm talking about more, so think about the commodities market today. Everything gets tokenized in the future. So the way you invest in the commodities market is probably going to be through, these autonomous platforms. So then you have this machine to machine economy with, AI robo advisors negotiating with AI asset managers, negotiating with AI marketplaces and so forth. It gets pretty interesting. What you don't probably have is you don't have institutions the way we think of them today, not in the way you think of healthcare institutions or financial institutions. That becomes largely embedded in the fabric of a highly autonomous society.
Super interesting. That is a bit mind-boggling.
I told you we're going to go futurist, brother. So
that is fascinating.
But this is 30 years out, right? So in the meantime, there's two types of people in the world, right? Those who are using artificial intelligence to enhance their career, enhance their business, to manage their money and their health, and those will be probably replaced by the first category, right? So it's either collaborative intelligence or you're just going to find yourself increasingly marginalized in terms of the way society sort of moves.
Yeah, I cannot agree with you more. Like I was at a conference just this morning for family offices and, just thinking about how AI is going to actually affect many that large space in a very profound way. And it's not clear as that most of the folks there know how big a wave is coming at them.
Like, yeah. No, I think you're right. I don't think we have any. If certainly by the way we're treating AI right now, the way we're treating regulation around artificial intelligence and data protection and things like that, the way we're looking at cybersecurity, we are completely underprepared.
Yeah. So maybe a question for you now, like you've looked so much at the industry and at banks and you worked with them and they follow you. Like how should banks and the current economy and the ecosystems be adapting to this, right? Like if you were the CEO of a bank right now or about to take over, what would you be thinking about?
I mean, I ask this question. I get asked this question a lot, but I also ask this question of senior bankers in terms of how they're adapting to this. You have a few bankers that sort of stand out in terms of this dialogue, at least becoming a technology company is the meme, right, for bankers. And so you have Jamie Dimon, which I think he's an excellent example of understanding the existential risks that AI and fintechs have to the traditional banking industry. And he's said in his investor letter that, he's scared of that. I won't use the language he used exactly. But you also have Piyush Gupta at DBS, who, I think is quite progressive. Certainly Digibank was ahead of its time as a launch of a digital only brand as a way to expand the business. And I think that's a great example. Chase ended up copying that in the UK, for example. But all of the fastest growing financial institutions in the world are fintech players. So the actual answer is you shouldn't be looking at a bank who's doing this well because no bank is doing it as well as the tech players. And so if you're trying to keep up with Chase or DBS because they're the best at digital, you're not even playing in the same league. You got to be trying to do what Alipay is doing. What Nubank in Brazil or Revolut is doing. You just got to think about playing in a different field from this point.
And if you're a fintech, like let's say Arnav, like what's your advice for how we engage with the ecosystem? Obviously we can provide technology and products that are way ahead, but what's the best way to engage with the ecosystem and help banks along? Because they do have incumbency, they do have users, there's a lot of trust factor.
Well, I mean, there's definitely partnerships that are necessary between banks and fintechs. I think that's key for both organizations. Fintechs need the funding, that banks can provide, or at least if that's as potentially as infrastructure customers or as investors, strategic investors. In addition to that, the banks need the speed of development and the curiosity and the ingenuity and innovative thinking that fintechs have. And that really is, I think, sort of pretty critical that if banks want to innovate fast, then one of the most effective ways to do that is with a fintech partnership because it's going to save them both time and money in terms of execution.
Yeah, we're actually seeing that because we launched for consumer in the US, but then we had a bunch of banks reach out, people we'd worked with in the past on Google Pay. We're like, how can we use your products? And so, we're seeing a lot.
Same thing happened with us with Movin. When they saw what we'd produced and people were like, TD Bank still using TD MySpend, which is the app we built for them on essentially on the Movin platform. And it's been more successful. It's been the most successful product they've ever launched, according to the CEO.
Oh, wow.
Right. So, that shows a successful, and, for us, there were points when TD was a lifesaver for us in terms of, strategic funding and so forth, so, for Movin. So, yeah. But, at the same time, I've gone into other banks and, the other banks have gone like, yeah, we really need your tech, but here, talk to this procurement department and we'll see. And the procurement department treats us like we're IBM and gives us a 80-page contract to read through and all of this sort of stuff. And it takes you 3 months to develop the tech and like 12 months to get through contracting with the legal and compliance guys. It's not, that's evidence of sort of dysfunction in terms of the way banks need to work, in an agile manner, particularly moving forward, especially with AI coming in.
Yeah. So I think you talked a little bit about AI. Like, I'd love to get into a couple of those aspects of AI. One is sort of what are the key challenges you see in the next, 3 to 5 years, and how can the industry and us and everybody else play together overcome those? And then the second, would love to get your thoughts on like AI, particularly in wealth management? And, how do you see that? How do you see that playing out?
All right. So you may need to remind me on the second question because I'm going to launch into the first. But when we look at AI today, a lot of what we're looking at is sort of application of technologies like ChatGPT for more conversational elements of banking. We do see fraud management. We see identity tech, for like facial recognition and things like this coming in. There are elements of AI being used broadly. One of the areas that's going to be huge in terms of massive assistance to the finance industry is money laundering as we start to
Yep.
automate money laundering tracking and so forth, as an example. But when we talk about where AI is most likely going to impact, and this is sort of an answer to the second question as well, most likely going to impact banking and financial advisory space, we're really talking about the application of an individual AI financial coach slash financial advisor assistant, right? And the AI is clearly going to be capable of providing that function in society, not just for finances, but more critically for healthcare, because we'll move from being, the medicine 2.0 world now where you've got a symptom, let's give you this drug, to medicine 3.0, which is now we want to be preventive, and stop you from getting these diseases. And then medicine 4.0, which is now more proactive. We're going to help you live longer and healthier lives, et cetera, right? So it's happening in healthcare, but it's happening in the finance space as well, where we will use an advisor to help us manage money. But there is not a single LLM in the world that is being trained on that type of data right now. So we don't have a good basis of an LLM that can do this. Now, there are some experimental stuff happening out there. Casisto out of Canada and US is experimenting with this. I know there's a program at JP Morgan Chase on this. And Nubank just acquired Hyperleap, I think it was, or I can't remember the company name. Yeah, to do this, to basically churn that through their 100 million customers. And you need about that scale to get the right sort of predictive data that can turn into a trusted agent that's not going to hallucinate, right? And so this requires massive data from the banking industry. It's potentially available through open banking means, but it actually would be better if like we had LLMs built by geographies, really, where the central bank came in and helped that and funded that for the development. Think of the next generation of finance and healthcare as an operating system for these functions in society, right?
Give me a month and a half, and there's some interesting stuff we want to show you. We are
All
seeing
right,
some
cool.
pretty interesting results from fine-tuning small LLMs and sort of combining multiple LLMs together. So we'll see. There's some interesting stuff coming up. The second question, Brett, was more around like sort of
Wealth
what
management.
are the
Yeah.
AI and wealth management.
So again, I think we have already seen with the robo advisors like Betterment and so forth, where they can compete, at a fairly consistent level with human asset management firms in terms of performance. So on the asset management side, that's only going to get better from this point. So we're going to obviously trust black box AI in terms of asset allocation and things like that for managed funds, et cetera. And then on the individual side, I think we're going to become much more mission-based and passion-based with investment. We're not talking philanthropy, but we are going to see, I think, brands in the 2030s, for example, brands will be identified as good brands or bad brands, right? Because of their actions in terms of whether they've contributed to climate change, whether they've adapted to more sustainable means when they could, and so forth, or if they've just been making money, right? And so this is really where you have a lot of sort of changes in this, and this is going to have a lot of experimental technologies, geoengineering and stuff like this, which are going to need big sizable investments, but are going to have to be more sort of socially mission oriented. So I think there's going to be generally a movement to invest in things like that. I think also people are going to invest a lot more in their health, especially as algorithms help them understand the amount of time it requires to live longer, healthier lives. And I think also you've got the freedom of work movement where people that can remote work and so forth are choosing to be digital nomads and so forth. So if you think about that sort of environment, and you're looking to invest in that environment, then an AI agent that can adapt to your individual styles in terms of what's important to you and reflect that in terms of your portfolio, I think that's a natural progression of where we see this tech going.
That's super interesting, and it's a bunch of stuff that we are working on that hopefully will get us a little bit in that direction. So in a few weeks, hoping to show you a lot of that. Brett, if it's okay, can we take a turn from work to you as a person? And a big
Sure.
part of like Arda Live Long and Prosper is our listeners actually love learning about how you've taken decisions, balancing career, money, work, like personal life, all of these together. So, I wanted to sort of get a little bit into Brett the person, Brett your life and the decisions you've taken. I didn't know this, but I mean, I knew as a best-selling author, like a podcast. So, I mean, you're the number one podcaster for banking. Yeah, I've known you as a like writer, entrepreneur, but I didn't know you were a rapper also in your career in the
No,
past.
no. So this, I wasn't actually a rapper. That was a misprint. Because I said I was a byte ripper, right? I was a
I see.
coder. Right. And so I said so that's funny you mentioned that. I said I was a byte ripper. And then, after they published it, it said I was a rapper. And I was like, I guess that's the algorithm doing the translation. But no, I was never a rapper. Although I did play in a band when I was in my like 19s and 20s, and I was a singer and a guitarist. So, I mean, that's similar. But no, I've never been a rapper. But my first book, here's something that you may not know. My first book was not actually a book on banking. It was actually a science fiction novel.
Oh, wow.
So so
Very
I've
cool.
always been a bit futuristic, I guess.
I need to go pick that one up. I've not read that. But Brett, I think what I wanted to get into is you've gone through so many different versions of your career over your life. Like, could you maybe pick one particular pivotal moment that you thought was really critical, important in your life, and talk about that particular pivotal moment that was a change in your career, and how do you make all the decision to do that, balancing like work, life, money, all of those things that people have to navigate?
I could talk about a couple of different moments in my life, but the one that's probably most impactful is I was in Dubai in 2008, and I was at a big Informa conference put on there, and Stephen Covey was the headliner. Right. And Covey was up there and he's presenting, and he had good data, but his slides were terrible and he wasn't a great speaker. But I knew he was getting paid like 50 grand for this gig. And I was there and I was like, I could do a better job than he could, on stage, at least, because I'd been in communicating and presenting for many, many years. Right. But I didn't have the platform he had. I didn't have 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I was like, all right, so I got to create a platform. What can I create a platform in? Well, I've been working in digitizing banking. So that's a good start. Let's start with that. But then I could be a futurist in banking. So talk about what the future of banking is going to hold, because that's combines the sci-fi interest and so forth. And so my 10-year plan was, I'm going to build a platform, and I'm going to create a platform as a futurist thought leader in the banking space. And, in 10 years, I want to be able to open or close one of the biggest financial conferences in the world. That was my goal. So the book comes out in 2010. So 2 years later, I've written the book. Comes out in 2010. That goes off. I get to be a resident futurist for Sapient Nitro out of the US, while I'm sort of game planning, building my own digital bank. All right. And sort of putting that together. And then 2011 comes and Movin launches, and we launch Movin at Cybos in October of 2011 in Canada, in Toronto, where I also get to do the closing keynote in front of 7,500 people. So, yeah, I mean, if you set your mind to it and you just get to it every day and do the work, then you can do it. Like, people talk about manifesting and so forth. You need that clarity of vision, but you just need to do the work.
Yeah. So, Brett, if I were to go back to that particular moment when you were coming out of that conference and deciding to take this, like, did you think about, obviously it's a very different path, there's risks involved. In a couple of years that worked out, but at that point, like, how did you balance sort of your known path of being a techie doing digital transformation, and then this new path where you would basically build a platform and talk about, like,
Yeah,
did
well,
money and all this come into play?
no, for sure. Because in 2008, I was in Dubai running a digital consultancy, and I had a financial services academy. So we were training private wealth managers, private bankers, et cetera, and giving them certification courses. So I had that business, and I had the digital consultancy helping banks do digital strategy. And essentially my revenue went from like 5 million a year in 2008 to like 300,000 in 2009 because of the financial crisis. So it's sort of like I had to like take a step back and think about reinventing myself. And it was like, listen, I've got a bit of cash in the bank. We've had a few good years. There's never going to be a better time for me to do this, to reinvent myself, So, but having said that, now that I've sort of faced that. At Movin, there were times when, I remember Christmas Day 2016. We had 2 million in liabilities. We didn't have enough money in the bank account to make the next payroll for the team, and we had 60 staff, and we got a check for $8 million in the bank. It's like, so it's like, you hear entrepreneurs talk about this stuff. Elon talks about it with SpaceX and Tesla. Branson talks about it with his businesses. That ability to persist and carry through when things are toughest really separates the most successful people in the world from those that said, yeah, I tried, but this thing happened and it didn't work.
Yeah. That's great advice. Thank you. As an entrepreneur late in my life, that's actually a very, very good reminder every single day.
Just
Of
keep
like,
pushing, bro.
just keep pushing, just keep pushing.
Yeah. Don't say no. It's like, no, I know I can find a way to make this work.
Yeah. Thank you. Going back to like, you went from the platform to an entrepreneur, which is again, a pretty high risk approach. If you want to have like,
sure, I can share that.
Yeah.
So I was doing my book tour for Bank 2. I was in LA. And I'd met all these bankers. I launched in London. I launched in Singapore first, actually, at the Asian Banking Summit with my friend Emmanuel Daniel. Then I went to London, then New York, then LA. And every time I'm meeting these bankers who are like, love your book. It's a phenomenal book, but it's really hard to get this stuff right. And it's all good to talk about it, but it's hard to do. And the implication was, yeah, you can write about this, but it's much harder to actually do this than what you've put in paper. So by the end of that sort of book tour, which was August the 8th, 2010, I was at a breakfast in Santa Monica, and there was a VC there, a guy called William Quigley, one of the guys who started Tether, actually. And Quigley was there, and he asks, tell me what the future of a bank is. So you tell me what a bank account looks like in 2030, 2035, right? And so I describe it. You're going to download it to your phone. You won't really have a concept of a bank account that we have today. It'll help you manage your money. It'll be your financial coach. It'll help optimize your spending and savings balance. And, described all this stuff. And he's like, but banks aren't going to do this. Who's going to do this? I was like, I'm going to do it. So that was literally the start. And I went home and I registered the domain Move and Bank, which was Move and Bank, right? And yeah, and so it was one of those things where like I was sick of people saying how hard it was, and I was just going to show the world how easy it was. It was still hard, but yeah, we got it done.
Yeah, it's amazing. I went through a similar path with wealth management and investing, like personally experiencing it as a user, and then at some point, just like my wife was like, "You should just stop complaining about it and do something about it."
Yeah, exactly.
And then we got into that. Switching a little bit to, you've talked a lot about money and finances, and now I'm really glad to see you looking at health, because I think the world of health is also huge. But how did your opinions about money and your beliefs about money and finances get shaped in your life? Like, if you're open to talking about it, like, where did the original...
I mean, my dad was a pretty good business operator in his day, so I got, I think, my business ethic from him. I could have been a more careful investor. I actually, when I was a programmer, a coder back in the day, I was actually earning pretty good money, but I got my pilot's license, and, I got a sports car and stuff like that, but I should have invested that more, certainly back in those days. But yeah, I think what's happened since, though, is now, I've got a plan around my money. I know how much money I need to have the quality of life that I want to have into retirement. And I also want to live longer and be able to earn money longer. So that means now taking a completely different view of my investments, because health is the number one asset class I have to invest in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a big change for me as I've got older, just realizing that you just can't, especially I travel to 30 countries a year as a speaker, and so I've really got to be careful. I do a lot of time sitting in planes and stuff. I've just got to keep myself healthy.
So if you don't mind, like, how are you thinking about your finances right now? How are you thinking about your wealth plans for the future? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with UBS and HSBC mostly as sort of my private banking space, but I'm now looking at more like, I'm trying to make my money more active to do things that are more meaningful. So yeah, I have my basic assets, and that are going to appreciate at the the S&P 500 rate, hopefully. But then I'm looking at more strategic investments personally, both from a private equity, sort of VC type basis, with friends, funds that, people that I know in the futurist community that are doing really interesting stuff and saying, and then other companies that I'm investing in personally that I sit on the board of, like Brak in Saudi Arabia, which is the fastest growing private wallet in the world. Plug to the guys at Bark. So barq.com. But yeah, so I'm investing in stuff that I feel like I can make a difference in, like that I can actually be more, bring my business experience and network to get investors and get some traction as well. So it's a little bit more tactical these days.
It's very interesting. And you also talked a lot about investing in health. Like, how have you sort of allocated some of your wealth towards investing in health?
So right now I'm looking at a longevity startup, which would be either based potentially in Saudi Arabia, here in Thailand where I live, or in Brazil, looking at essentially building the world's first health operating system,
Wow.
So thinking about, like how do we build in for every person from cradle to grave, a complete record of their health. So every time you go to a doctor, a dentist, everything that's recorded, and an AI is able to use that for, proactively helping you manage your health as you age, and less invasive testing mechanism, things like that, where we can get more data using those, sensors that are emerging as they come out, just basically to build this sort of autonomous healthcare system. Because we know just on diagnostics alone and on things like gene therapy and understanding, those sort of protein patterns and being able to use gene editing for that stuff, all of those things combined is going to radically change the way we think about healthcare. For sure. So, let's build a digital twin operating system for every human on the planet, essentially.
That's really
Just a
fascinating.
small project.
Just a small project. Change humanity forever. It's a tiny
But
project.
that's now I'm like, I want to leave a dent, I want to leave a mark, and I've done that in the banking space. And I was like, where more could I add value, and it's just, I'm passionate about it. I may not get to that point, but at least, we have to try. This is the time for doing crazy things. We just saw Jared Isaacman take the first private commercial spacewalk, like this is not the time to be shy.
Yeah. Oh, completely get it. And also, like, if you look at it, like the most basic things for humanity, right? Relationships and family, health and money,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And you've already done money. Maybe
Yeah.
the next 15 years is health, and maybe then you'll
Yeah.
fix relationships for everyone also. And it's a really, really big and profound space.
From personal experience, I'm learning about the whole relationship side as well. Things change, But I think life is an interesting journey. What's the Sanskrit thing that says that there's no right or wrong? There's only lessons in life.
Oh, that's beautiful. So I wanted to switch a little bit. Like, what advice would you have for people who are looking at you and saying, like, I kind of want to be like Breton in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years?
I mean, you got to have that clarity of vision, and you just got to execute every day, and at times that's tough. At times there's going to be, maybe you won't have, your family may not believe in your mission, and then by asking you to, can you quit this startup thing and get a full-time job? I'm sick of not having enough money and, never seeing you and things, which are reasonable positions. But, like if you want to be successful, you have to have the absolute clarity of vision, and you have to be prepared to put in the hard yards at the start. Over time, once you get on top of that curve, then you can have a very high quality of life, both, theoretically, financially, and from a family life perspective. But the work-life balance during that process is tough. But I would say the other thing is really focus on connections, because I'm finding that if you are really genuine with people and you really try to stay connected with people and help them, when you have something to execute on, then you have a team of people that'll be your supporters. So I think that's something else as well. There's a lot of stuff that we need to do, particularly in like tackling climate and things like that, where we're going to need to be a lot more collaborative. We're going to need to see a lot more policy changes around focused on the common good rather than the good of the market. We are going to see these sort of value changes. So there's never going to be a better time really than, over the next 10 or 20 years to do something really interesting that can make life better for, the average human.
I wish we had a few more hours. I'd love to get into some of these big things you brought up, health, UBI. Personally, I've also been very, very keen on all that stuff. And then, it's like this whole
we danced
connectedness.
around it, didn't we?
We
But
danced
I mean,
around it.
yeah, we can have another. We'll do another podcast another time and get into UBI and let you know the nature of work and the nature, whether capitalism will survive. I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. My wife just did one of the Singapore's first large scale unconditional grant transfer experiments, which is, kind of like UBI, but in a way very successful on a number of counts.
Send me some info. Yeah, I mean, I looked at 70 UBI studies for my last book, The Rise of Techno-Socialism. And, like the mental health changes, the
family
everything.
relationships.
Suicide rates drop, mental health rates go up.
Gosh.
People started businesses at 3 times the rate of the general population. They're almost twice as likely to get involved in community activities. It's sort of the best investment a community can make, frankly.
Super interesting. Definitely will follow up. Okay, Brent, to close off, I wanted to fire a few very quick lightning round questions for you.
Cool.
Ready? And these are just whatever comes to the top of your mind. Just sort of fill in the blanks, right? So first question, if you want to prosper, never underestimate the power of that.
Persistence.
Persistence. If you want to prosper, never underestimate the power of persistence. That's beautiful. The 3 key ingredients for a long, fulfilling life are dash, dash, and dash.
Self-worth, time management, and discipline.
That's what time management. Such beautiful. You can see that. And the last question, the simple joy that adds years to my life is
gaming on my PC. or the women in my life. Most of the time.
Absolutely. Brett, thank you so much for doing this. It's been fascinating talking to you, and definitely want to get in those bigger topics in a future conversation.
Thanks, Caesar.